Okay, well, welcome to Solar Noon Tuesday, and we do this each week where what we try and do is go through the weekly news in the solar industry, the solar photovoltaic industry. Then I'll also recap some of the webinars or announcements that are out there that are available if you want to do a little bit deeper dive. And then we try and focus on one item or anything that comes from the group that's here live attending. And we'll try and hit through all of that. And so here we go. This is the news from the week of October 22nd. And there were a couple of interesting landmark agreements that were signed in the last week or so. The first one I'm going to highlight, it's an agreement that's been signed by a bunch of solar developers, land conservation groups, environmental organizations, indigenous tribal nations representatives, agricultural interests, community groups, and investors. And essentially what they're trying to do is anticipate and avoid any problems that might arise as we begin to transition into the renewable energy age, and specifically with industrial scale or utility scale solar. So it's anticipated over the next 10 years, utility scale solar is going to increase about fivefold. So 5 times what we've experienced here recently. And so this agreement is looking at addressing the transition of land from agricultural to essentially solar, how to deal with wildlife and habitat preservation and protections and any impacts it's going to have, and also looking at community resistance, community engagement in this process. So it seems pretty forward thinking on this. This committee or group was convened by Stanford Woods Institute on the Environment and Solar Energy Industries Association, along with the Nature Conservatory. Conservancy. And anyway, they've been working on this about 20 months. They've got the framework in place, and then there are working groups that have been established that are going to continue to work on this just to make sure this transition goes as smoothly as possible. And speaking of agreements, there are 3 unions got together and made an agreement about their individual responsibilities when it comes to installing utility solar. The IBEW, that's the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the Laborers International Union of North America, as well as the International Union of Operating Engineers. And these 3 labor unions essentially decided to divvy up the world of solar, utility solar installation amongst themselves. Who knows if they pushed anybody out? I don't know. This is important because the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, essentially says for these large systems, they must pay prevailing wage in order to qualify for all of the credits, the tax credits and the like, which is essentially union wages. And they must also utilize a apprenticeship program, a recognized apprenticeship program. So most of these large systems are going to be involving unions in some form or fashion. The domestic solar capacity for production of solar panels, solar cells, has been soaring recently. And this week, there was an announcement from Q-Cells that their Dalton, Georgia plant has begun operations. So if you look over, since last August when the IRA passed, about 72 new manufacturing facilities have been announced. And they're going to be producing an incredible amount of solar panels. In fact, of those that have already been announced, CEA says that the capacity there is going to be about 70 gigawatts. To put this in comparison, in 2022, the US only produced about 5 gigawatts of solar power, and this Dalton plant is going to produce about 5.1 gigawatts. So the 70 gigawatts, it's a lot. CES says they think about 42 gigawatts of annual production will be online by 2027. And that's going to meet about 90% of the domestic market place. So what we're seeing is from relying about 85% on China-oriented solar panels last year, we're really seeing that within 5 years or so, we will transition, at least if everything goes the way it's planned, to about 90% or better of domestically manufactured solar panels. And this is largely because of the incentives in the IRA. Domestic manufacturing is not just limited to the panels, of course. Inverters and other components have to be domestically manufactured. So Fronius just announced that they're going to be building a 400,000 square foot facility in Portage, Indiana, which I looked on a map, see where that was. It's up near Gary, Indiana, right up there in the Chicago metro area. This new inverter production will increase their staff from about 200 to about 500 domestically. And they're looking at, by the end of next year, being able to produce about 1 gigawatt of inverters, and then increase that by 2029 to about 7 gigawatts of inverters. And I found this interesting since we have an electrical co-op. The USDA, the Department of Agriculture, has announced that they're getting a flood of applications from co-ops looking for funding that's available. I think this is through the Infrastructure Act that transitions or helps transition to solar from their current supply of generation. They got about 750 project requests last year. This is about double what they could fund from the $9.7 billion that they received for this transition of electrical co-ops. Co-ops have been traditionally very reluctant to move into renewable energy. A lot of these are rural, very conservative. They rely very heavily on coal as their primary source of power generation. I know here in Ohio, the co-ops buy all their power from Buckeye Power, and it's almost 100% coal. They've closed only about 15% of their coal operating plants, generating plants. And this compares with other utilities, non-co-ops, that have closed about 57% of their coal generation facilities. So part of the reason for this is while these other companies have been transitioning to renewable, they've been taking advantage of tax credits that exist. Well, co-ops are nonprofits. So there was no advantage from the tax credit standpoint since they don't pay federal taxes. But with the new IRA, they're allowed to get as a rebate these tax credits. So the incentives are now there for the nonprofits to transition as well. Now, there are some headwinds on this. In fact, I was surprised to see that Florida, South Dakota, Iowa, and Kentucky, their legislatures have decided to prohibit co-ops within those states from applying for any funds that come from the IRA, because in their infinite wisdom, they've said that this is just a handout to China, so we don't want any part of it. So I guess that means more for the rest of us. So anyway, that seems self-defeating. And that's the news from the solar industry for this week. So anybody have anything they want to add to that or anything they've heard recently? Give you just a second to pop up on that. All right. And again, feel free to break in. So here's the announcements for this week. As far as webinars and the like, there are a bunch of them. Rather than me having any links, I'll just tell you they exist and you can go out there and use ChatGPT or Google or whatever. You can find them on your own. So October 24th, which is today at 3 p.m., there is a session on utility scale battery storage systems. So that's coming up. The 25th, there's a webinar coming on from Renview. This is on ballasted ground mounted systems. Kind of an interesting racking system. They use what look like scoops from front end loaders or whatever, filled with gravel, dirt, whatever, and they're a way of installing solar. So that one's pretty interesting. Another webinar coming up on the 25th at 2 p.m. Grid resilience planning. So this is put on by CPIA, AEP, and NRECA. So that's the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. So that's coming up. The 25th, also at 2, is one put on by Honeywell on combining batteries and building management systems, if you're so inclined there. 26th at noon, one on dual land use for large utility scale systems. 26th, also at 2 p.m., Savant Energy is going to be talking about their proprietary system. It's a DC coupled residential system. Everseal talking about non-metallic racking attachments for roofs. that seems very drilling down. Everbolt is having a system, their home energy system. Again, another proprietary. This is on the 31st at 2 p.m. Panasonic manufactures this system. Then on November 6th, also at 2 p.m., IREC is going to have a discussion on codes, safety, resiliency in system installation. November 8th, see, we've got a whole bunch of them coming up. Trina Solar talking about their racking system, their tracking system. So it would be for larger systems. November 9th at 2 p.m., if you want to get into commercial or industrial sales, there's a webinar coming up on moving from residential into those larger systems. November 14th, 2 p.m., utility scale design. So again, if you're in that larger system thing, and this gets really in the weeds, there's one on November 15th at 9 a.m. Utility scale DERMS. DERMS are distributed energy resource management systems. So they're basically computer programs that manage the larger systems in New Mexico, of all places. And then on November 15th, there's one on lead technology. That's put on by the U.S. Green Energy Council. And this one I'm kind of interested about. November 16th, 2 p.m., Google's new solar API program. In fact, I'm thinking next week I'm going to go ahead and highlight this particular program. Looks like Google's getting into the world of solar design. They're looking at integrating solar design and solar resource into Google Maps. So we'll see how that works out, what's involved there. And then, of course, we here at solarpvtraining.com have our upcoming, sessions online and face-to-face. All right, so that's the news from the webinars. I know that was a whole bunch. Anybody else, anybody have anything they want to throw into the mix there as we're moving forward? Oh, everybody's being very, very quiet. All right, so let me jump in. I attended a webinar last week, I think it is, maybe the week before, about Enphase's new electric vehicle charging system. I was kind of interested to see what they're coming up with, what this does, what it doesn't do, and so I thought that I would take what I got from that and did some other research, and then also just to kind of inform you guys on what was going on. I don't know if anybody else was on that one. About half of it was spent them trying to figure out how to get their apps working. It was a lot of technical disruption in the webinar, but overall, not a complete waste of time. So let me touch base on what this is all about. What we have here is the Enphase system is brand new. In fact, they just said this week they're beginning to take orders, pre-orders. And I think we've talked about this with Tony before. He does all the charging stations, and I don't know if Tony's on the line. But anyway, there's a lot of announcements that these companies make, like these things exist, but they don't really. We've talked about bidirectional charging. I'll touch on that in a little bit. But I think it was about 6 months ago or so, I saw Enphase's announcement that they're getting into the EV charging world, and that they had bought Clipper Creek. And Clipper Creek is a well-known level 2 charging system. And so they had bought that and they were folding it into it. So my assumption is they had a product out already, but apparently that assumption was wrong. And so they're just taking pre-orders today or this week. So you're getting news hot off the shelf here. And so what is it exactly? What are the specs? Well, jump in on that and talk a little bit about what their systems do, can and cannot do. They've got a number of products here on the market. They've got a 40 amp, 50 amp, 60 amp, and 80 amp system. The 80 amp one, they're really marketing for commercial, but the 40, 50, 60, They've in their chart, they've shown you about how many miles per hour of charging that these different units will provide. So the 40 amp will give you about 28 miles of charging every hour. The 50 amp about 35 and the like. The unit looks exactly like the Clipper Creek unit. I believe it is exactly the same model, but they've added in some software and some communication devices. It is hard. You can either buy with the plug, a 240 plug, or you can get them hardwired. Some of the larger ones, they say that you've got to get them hardwired. They do say the connectivity here, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. So I'll touch on this in a little bit, but there were some discussions about how do you wire this into your system. Once you've installed it, how does it connect in with the rest of the system? Basically, it connects in wirelessly. You just treat it like it's an appliance. For the most part, you wire it in to a 240 outlet, connect it in either to a sub panel or to your main panel and service panel, and that's it. The rest of it all connects to the gateway communication system wirelessly. I don't know what the distance is, though. I suspect there will be a distance issue. For example, our charging station here at our office is about 150 feet away from the gateway, and the gateway is in the basement. So, whether it will actually have the range and the communications ability, I don't know. 25-foot ruggedized cable, they seem very impressed by that. And the other thing is 5-year warranty, which seems awfully nice. So just to give you a sense of charging and the like, I thought I would just throw this up where if you're looking at about EV charging, the charging stations, the AC level 1, and AC level 1 is effectively just an extension cord, a 120 extension cord, plugs into your vehicle. At the 12 amp, you're going to get about 4 miles per hour of charging. And at the 16 amp unit, you're going to get about 6 miles per hour. To give you an example of this, we have a Prius plug-in. The first 35 miles are essentially electric. And when we use the AC level 1, it does take about 7 hours to charge that, to get that 35 miles. So very, very slow, definitely overnight. Now the level 2 there, as we're saying, the 20 miles would be, I think we're talking 20, 40, 60 amp, 80 amp, I guess, is the 60 miles per hour. That would be the 19.2 kW. And then the DC fast charging, this is where, it's not for home or commercial primarily. It's for those people who want to, they're on the road and need to recharge. These are the large DC fast charging. And you can see the highest one, you can get 90 miles in about 20 minutes. So that's the charging rate there, but you're not going to be looking at installing those DC fast chargers for the most part. I found it kind of interesting how they were marketing. I see somebody's raised a hand. Yeah, Pete, you've got your hand raised.
Yes, I'm familiar with 6 and 7 kW onboard chargers on EVs. Is that a thing that some of the EVs have 19.2 kW onboard chargers, or is that a DC connect as well, but not the normal high power of a DC connection?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's going to overwhelm your system. You mean in the vehicle?
Right.
If you're coming in, because it's Enphase, so it's AC, I would assume. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Did anybody else out there know the answer to that?
I'll quick add something else, and that is that the chargers on the vehicles, those are switch mode devices. And typically, I don't know that this is true on EVs, but typically switch mode devices work perfectly well on AC or DC. It's a little surprising to see Enphase feeding AC to what mostly is a DC device, that converter to charge the EV.
Yeah, well, I think most of the home charging, of course, is essentially an AC appliance. Because you just simply plug it into the wall. The commercially available charging stations. So I guess they're trying to tap into that. And bear in mind, this is not bi-directional. So at the moment, it doesn't really matter. I could see a bi-directional charger that works with a battery system wanting to be DC. There might be some advantages for sure with that. I know we've had Tony on here before talking about charging, the philosophy. Do you want it to be the charger to handle the conversion, or do you want the vehicle to handle the conversion? That's kind of the thing that's still up in the air. So,
Jay,
yeah.
the Polestar 2 I rented would take a full 48 amp charge, and it was very configurable on the screen in the car to between 16 amp and 48 amps. So it'll take the full 60 amp.
Yeah,
full
will it
60
get all
amp
the way up to 80 though?
circuit.
I guess is the question.
Yeah, it wouldn't go. It only went to 48 amp, which would be a 60, circuit breaker.
Yeah, 48 amps continuous on a 60 amp
Yeah,
unit.
yeah, there you go. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder on that commercial one, because they really are marketing that 80 amp as the commercial option.
Well, that'd be a DC fast charger too. I was just talking AC.
Yeah.
Level 2.
Yeah.
If you're a DC fast charger, it would take, I think it was 150.
Well, it's still considered, that 80 amp is still considered a level 2. So it's not a DC fast charger, but I think it is probably marketed towards fleets, fleet vehicles. So if you're a UPS or a school bus system, maybe that's a different world that I'm not that into, where these systems are already charging it at 80 amps regardless. Because if you've got a school bus and you're waiting, even 60 amps is going to be pretty slow. So, yeah, the other thing about the commercial market here that I found interesting, how they were marketing themselves. And I guess I'm feeling a little jaded by some of the marketing things, but they're very proud of the fact that it's got up to 80 amps. So when they compare themselves with other people, they're always touting, hey, we can go even higher. But as we've just been discussing, maybe that doesn't help, because it's only a very niche market that can even accommodate those. No network fees. Now, this came out of the blue, and maybe it's just something that I've missed, but I didn't realize that some of these charging stations, the manufacturers actually charge a networking fee, for management of your data and things like that. Again, maybe it's not for the commercial market or for the consumer market. Maybe that's more in the commercial vein, but they're just basically saying they don't charge these networking fees. 5-year warranty, well, that's the same on their residential. Key access. I'll just show you. When I bought one of their Clipper Creek. This is the key access that they're bragging about. It's this little $2 padlock that comes with the box that I never took out of the plastic, because who wants to lock up my little charger? But that seemed a little bit strange to warrant a bullet point on their marketing. And then the cable management, they're pleased with that it's looped around. But it's funny, when I looked at the instruction manual, they always show it with the cable looped pretty tightly around that management. And then in the instruction or the installation manual, it says, don't do that, right? Don't loop it tight. They want you to drape it, make it look loose, like a hose hanging on something. So again, marketing people, what do you want? And I guess I'm down on the marketing folks, because one of the things I did, because I knew I was going to be installing Enphase here at our office, and I also knew I was going to be putting in a vehicle charger. Well, when I saw their announcement that they were getting into the EV charging world and that they had bought Clipper Creek, I called them up and I said, hey, I want to buy this Clipper Creek unit that you've got here. is this going to work for the EV charging thing and everything? Oh, yeah. Everything's Clipper Creek. Yeah, don't worry about it. And then at this webinar, I actually submitted a question saying, hey, I bought this Clipper Creek thing. Is this going to do what you're saying everything's doing with this new Enphase? And they're like, no, it's not backward compatible. You know, it doesn't have the communication thing in it. It's just a charger. And of course, that was annoying, but it seems par for the course with Enphase, where a lot of their stuff is not backward compatible. So, and which gets me into another thing I'll focus here on when we get to their bi-directional thing, because they brought up on that. But they did want to mention about incentives, that the incentives out there for EV charging stations exist. One thing to bear in mind, if you're putting in the EV charging, it does qualify for the 30% tax credit, residential. And the more if you're doing a commercial system. So commercial with the IRA, with the new tax credits, there's 30% federal tax credit just right off the bat on all of this stuff, whether it's commercial or residential. There's the 10% bump if you're using domestically manufactured product. Not quite sure still. I haven't gotten definitive answer on whether that applies to residential as well as commercial. I know it does for commercial, just have never seen anybody willing to say it applies on residential. And up until now, it's been kind of a non-issue because there just hasn't been enough US manufactured product to worry about. But we're getting there. We're getting there soon. And then there's what they refer to as energy communities. It's what I call the West Virginia or the Joe Manchin provision. So if you happen to live in an energy community, which is one that's been dependent on fossil fuels, or next to an area where they closed a coal power plant, then you get another 10% bump. So with all of those, you can get 50% tax credit on your system. So, but there are utilities systems for incentives and rebates that are out there and available that can cover the cost of the purchase of the charging system. Even our little local co-op, they had a $250 basically credit if you installed a charging station, and the person from the co-op came and looked at where we installed it and said, yeah, that looks good. And then sure enough, on our bill next month, we got a $250 credit. So that's nice. You can manage your time of use, your systems there. They're talking about that as far as incentives, rebates, higher rebates, EV rebates, and all of that. So they were plugging in some of those things just to talk about how some of this can be subsidized, because they never brought up how much this thing's going to cost. I still don't know. I guess you can pre-order it and then they'll tell you. But I know that the Clipper Creek, which is similar, ended up costing, if I remember, $650, somewhere in that range, for the 40 amp unit. I would assume it'll be similar. It's the same unit only, but they've added in this Bluetooth thing. So maybe that bumps it a little bit. They were trying to differentiate themselves amongst some of the other large charger offerings out there. And so Enphase, they're talking about time of use management that's integrated into the system. So if you are working with a utility, if your system has where the electricity is priced at one level at one part of the day, lower levels during off-peak demand, you can then adjust when you charge your car based on the cheapness of the electricity. You can also go into self-consumption. And this is becoming more and more of a thing because utilities are essentially paying wholesale for the most part. So they charge you retail, but they're only paying you wholesale when you pump it back onto the grid. So why pump it back onto the grid? Why not charge your electric vehicle? And instead of just charging until it's full, this will seamlessly say, okay, I've got excess power from my array, so let's put it into the the vehicle. All right, now clouds come out. I don't. Well, let's stop charging the vehicle until I have excess. So it monitors it, turns it on and off, on and off. So instead of you pumping power back onto the grid, it's charging your vehicle instead until it's full, at which point it'll pump it back onto the grid. And they were really pleased with this storm guard thing. And I'm not quite sure I see a huge advantage of this, but basically what it says is if the system receives a weather alert that a storm is coming, it's going to make sure your car is charged. So all bets are off. If a weather alert comes through, it throws everything from the grid and everything else so that you've got a full tank of gas essentially once the storm hits and you've got to get out of Dodge. So that was their big thing.
I think that's them getting ready for bi-directional, really.
You think so? Yeah, maybe it's just something they came up with as a marketing thing for a technology that existed for that other purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. 5-year warranty. Yeah, that's good. It compares with Solar Edge. Yep. You had something, Gary?
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask, did you pick up on whether they require a load controller purchase for this? Because I picked up on that from one of the YouTubes I watched.
That seemed a little unclear. I have some diagrams here. It seemed like some of the functionality did require that you wire it through the load controller.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't quite sure, and I didn't get into the weeds that much. Mm-hmm. But for most applications, you can just simply wire it into your service panel or into a sub panel. But I think if you're going to use your battery, if you needed to charge it when the grid was off or something like that, it had to go into the load controller. But again, I think that's moving towards that bidirectional, where now that becomes another battery source for your critical loads. So if you tie it into your load controller, then that power is available just like, your batteries would be. So that was a little deeper than I wanted to get on this one. There are also, some of the other things. It looked like the one that it compares favorably with is Solar Edge. The Solar Edge system seems very similar. So they're not really talking about bidirectional, which is what at least I think about as a great advantage of EV chargers being tied into my system. Otherwise it's just a standalone appliance, it's charging my car and all of that. But the main things they're talking about is you can manage for self-consumption, you can manage for time of day pricing issues, and then they throw in the storm guard, but that's kind of neither here nor there as far as I'm not too worried about that. All of these systems, we're moving towards everything is managed on your phone. They wanted to talk about how great their management system is. And I must say it is pretty good. I like their Enphase management system from the phone. They were clear here that their whole system is backwards compatible. So they were made a big deal about everything we're doing here will integrate in with our software, with our current software. And I know they've just updated and upgraded all of their, monitoring software. So that may be why they did such an extensive upgrade, anticipating this being added in. You can look at it, you can monitor it, you can see how much it costs you to charge your vehicle. You can change self-consumption issues, backup, the storm guard, all of that. There's a real-time kind of monitoring profile here. And I thought what I would do here, because I as we were talking about this, I thought I would share my screen and show you our system here. Just if you're not familiar with Enphase's new interface, one of the things I like, and I look at it, a fair amount because it's fairly new for me and I'm playing with it. But this is the live stream functionality. So on here, now you integrate in the batteries or the charging into this, but we don't have that at the moment. So this is just showing you in real time that the array out there is producing 3.2 kW. The building is consuming 0.6 kW and currently exporting 2.6 kW to the grid. And I just thought of this, but let me lean over and turn on this big electric heater. So if I turn that on, we'll see just how real time this thing is. It should update to demonstrate. Nah, it's not being so real time here, is it? I was anticipating this consumption thing will just go way up. I wonder if I've got to refresh my screen. All right, come on. It's always fun to play around with these things and we'll see if they actually work. Yep, there it goes. Yep. So on the phone, it's a lot more responsive than this computer, but we used it when we were just checking circuits in the house, where I could sit down there at the breaker and have somebody turn on an appliance, and if the power consumption went up by the amount of that appliance for these heaters or the like. So that was kind of neat. And so their system is good. It'll show you how much you produced, in different status, but that part's all very similar. But anyway, I just thought the Enphase, it's nice that you can control all of these things from your phone, like everything else. And a couple of the installation issues that I identified as they were kicking through some of this is if you do add an EV charger to your system, you can anticipate that you've got to add about 2 to 4 kW of solar panels. That's the additional load that you're going to be facing. So this is a nice upmarket sell if you're in the business of selling solar. You want to put in a solar EV charging station. Well, you may have to expand the array, or as the case we did here, we wired it to be expanded that much if we needed it, so that we future-proofed the original installation where we could add 2 to 4 kW without having to rewire or anything. We could just throw more panels. Now that caused us a little problem with AEP, because I got approval for the larger system in my original application, and then we didn't install the whole system. And then AEP came back and said, you didn't install as many panels as you said you were going to install. And I said, yeah, well, we're waiting to see if we're going to overproduce or not. And then they said, well, now you got to reapply all this and go back and start all over. And it was a nightmare. And speaking of nightmares with utilities, I heard an interesting podcast, not just for the little guys like I'm talking about, but for these big community solar or installation utility scale systems. This guy was lamenting the fact that in the past, and this is true on residential systems as well, you install the system, the day you finished it up, you don't have permission to operate. But reality, you turn the thing on, you make sure it's working, and then you turn it off and you say, okay, Mr. Utility, come out and take a look and give us permission to operate. But you've kind of troubleshot through anything before that happens. Well, he was saying they were always allowed to do that. Now they're not allowed to do that. Now they got to wait until the guy comes out, and then they turn it on and there's some minor problem. So then the utility says, well, reschedule another visit and we'll be back in 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever. So that's an issue for the big boys. And he also said now they're putting in certain things, like they're saying, we need to see 90% of the nameplate production. Well, what if it's cloudy? What if it's hot? What if it's whatever? And they come out and it's not producing, and they go, well, you're going to have to schedule it for a nicer day, 8 weeks from now. You go, well, how do I know what the day's going to be like? So this is one of those things where you're saying now, instead of it taking, 60 days, it takes 180 days. And it's all because utilities are throwing all of these things out out in the mix. So 30% ITC, the investment tax credit, applies to these systems and the upgrades. As I mentioned, to my scorn, it's not backward compatible with Clipper Creek. So if you did what I did and thought you were sort of future proofing, no such luck. And it does connect through Bluetooth, but caution you there because I'll get back to that. But we talked about how these things hook in when I was looking at their installation manuals. And this is kind of hard to find because, again, a lot of this is vaporware, I think. They're saying this is pre-order, but they're not shipping them, but try and find an installation manual on a product that's not shipping yet. And that could be somewhat problematic. But it does look here like they're just hooking that charger directly into the service panel. And everything else, this is for a non-battery, non-sunlight backup system. So everything else is pretty standardized and you're just hooking that in as another load. But when we get into the world of bidirectional, and they were claiming that their technology is ready for bidirectional. This is what the engineers on the call were saying, but they can't sell it yet because the standardizations are not in place. The auto manufacturers haven't approved for bidirectional use. So they're waiting for that. Well, then to me, that's not ready because if you don't know what the standards are, your technology doesn't meet those standards that don't exist. But again, they're saying it might be 18 months, might be 12. Well, it's funny that the first guy said 12 months before this will be out there. And then the next guy said, well, more like 18 months. And probably if they had a third guy, he'd say more like 2 years, so we'll see. But anyway, I did run across this diagram of what they're anticipating the wiring for bidirectional is going to look like. And this caused me a little bit of a pain, concern, because now they're throwing in a whole new piece of equipment with additional this almost looks like that battery interface where you've got microinverters and a controller unit and the bidirectional charger all incorporated, and then linking into your service system controller is where they showed that hooking into and tying in your batteries. So not quite sure what this means. It looks to me like, well, because you're basically using your battery on your vehicle, and that's going to be DC, so you've got to invert that to AC. So you've got to have all of these microinverters in there and treat it just like another battery. And it's got the control unit. So then you've got a pretty expensive piece of equipment out there as a bidirectional charger. And if you're trying to future-proof this, what kind of wiring needs is that going to be? Because again, our charger is back at where we park the vehicles, which is 150 feet away from all of these controlling units. So I think trying to future-proof for this installation might be a little more difficult than might be at first blush. Yeah.
The other thing I thought of was I thought the bidirectional sounded really great at first until I realized that, wait a minute, my car has to be at the house in order for that to work. If I have my car in Florida, my house is getting backed up by my car.
Sure.
I'd have to have batteries in the basement anyway. So I'm not sure what the cost of it.
Yeah, some of that's going to be a matter of, how much battery do you need?
Mm-hmm.
That's, you can maybe get by with the, 5 kW of battery or 5 kilowatt hours instead of 15,
right.
So,
right. Or 70.
Yeah, I'm in a situation here with our installation where we went ahead and did the sunlight backup. So the IQ8s will power critical loads if the sun is shining. And the reason we did that is because I didn't want to invest in batteries just yet, because I figured the battery technology is changing, and we don't have any huge critical loads here. It's not like we've got freezers full of, whatever, or that we're a pharmaceutical, that things that the loads are just not that critical. But the sunlight backup is kind of nice. And also all of the infrastructure is now in place that when we go to add the batteries, it's really just a matter of sticking the battery in there and connecting it into the controller. And that's it. You know, so we don't have to buy this controller and rewire everything. And we've got the load controller already in place. You can add a second one if you want to. So you could handle essentially 8 circuits instead of 4. So yeah, pretty good system for small things like this, you know, for a regular old house. So anybody have any questions on this or anything else?
Jay, Devanan here. The DC charging units, they actually out already?
The DC charging units?
DC fast charger, yeah.
Oh, yeah. There are fast chargers, but not from Enphase. But yeah, there are DC charging fast chargers. Those are the ones you see at service stations.
Yeah, I know, but I just wondering I saw the chart you had if that was an Enphase product itself.
Oh, you're talking about like the 80 amp unit?
Nah, not well, 80 amp. I think that is still level 2, but we're talking about level 3 here. So like, you know, if you're going up 150 amps, 200 amps, let's say 200 kilowatt. Because here in Trinidad, it is a business for dealerships, automotive dealerships. Many of them, before they enter into a market to sell EV vehicles, what you find happening, a lot of the manufacturers are requiring that the dealers install at least 1, maybe 2 DC fast chargers.
Oh, okay.
At the business.
Yeah, I don't think Enphase is anticipating getting into the fast charger market. It doesn't make any sense since they're an AC system anyway, to go DC. But those DC charging stations can be very pricey. I think.
It is expensive because the cost they're going to change over, let's say, to 30, 40 supply to 400 or 480. That is very expensive too.
Yeah. The other thing that we've run into with the fast charging is the demand charges. The way utilities operate, you could see your electric bill double easily just by adding 1 DC charging station. So yeah, that's problematic. We're gonna have to struggle through some of this transition to see how best to handle the EV charging. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Give you just a second. All right, hearing none, then I will go ahead and call this session to an end. And next week we'll talk about the Google's foray into the world of solar. That'll be interesting to see what's going on there. All right, so take care, everybody. See you next week. Bye-bye.